Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Hot Mess Life Coach Season 2. I'm your host, Brian Hogan, both a hot mess and a life coach, because, hey, that's allowed. In today's world, that's allowed. This is the show for people trying to get it together while the world seems to fall apart. And as I've mentioned in previous episodes, I say seems to fall apart because I actually think what we're witnessing is the undergoing of a huge transformation of human consciousness, which is going to lead us to a place of more peace and more harmony, and realizing we need to shake off these obsolete ways of thinking that have caused all the gloom and doom and horror that we currently see around us. To that end, I am an experimenter, and I like to experiment with all kinds of things that I think might help myself, help the world, help my community, help my family. And one of those things that I did an experiment with back in 2020 was microdosing. Microdosing psilocybin mushrooms in very, very, very small doses. So today's topic is about microdosing, a microdose of reality, I like to call it. I want to talk about what is the myths and what are the realities, because microdosing is a taboo. Mushrooms are a taboo. Illicit drugs are a taboo. But sometimes hidden behind the taboos in our society is something like a gift, something that could be hugely beneficial and hugely open our eyes and our minds to a new way of being. I mean, the whole movement of the 60s was a taboo, and yet it caused a revolution, however temporary that revolution may have been. Sorry, baby boomers, but you dropped the ball on that one. It was a revolution in human consciousness then, even on a small scale, and it helped us to see in a miniature microcosmic version what is possible for humanity, how we can live in peace, how we can enjoy the present moment, how we can find harmony in our differences. That was the era of Martin Luther King. That was the era of the beginnings of psychedelic research. There were so many things about the 60s that were about an awakening, about a transformation of human consciousness. And I think that was the beginning birth pangs of what we're going through now with this newest generation, with I'm Generation X, and my generation and those younger than me, there's a lot of experimenting going on, and a lot of sort of throwing things against the wall and seeing what sticks. And since the science is slow to catch up on things that are taboo, especially things that are illegal, like psilocybin mushrooms or anything like that, we have to do our own experimenting. We have to become the subjects of science ourselves and do our own research by searching again, searching again for the truth in our own lives, in our own minds, and in our own hearts. So I've been searching all over again for the truth about psychedelics. And I've done some research online, but I did some practical experimenting for an entire year in 2020. And I want to share that journey and that story with you all today. So first of all, what is microdosing? Well, microdosing is the practice of taking small sub-perceptual doses of a psychedelic substance. The likely candidates generally in this psychedelic microdosing movement are magic mushrooms or psilocybin, LSD, or DMT. My journey was with psilocybin mushrooms specifically. And there was a lot of sort of massive benefits that happened for me, which I'll get into in a little while here. But before I do that, I just want to talk about sort of why microdosing has remained on the fringe, even though hundreds of thousands of people have reported positive benefits. Like, the anecdotal evidence is bigger than the island of garbage in the Atlantic Ocean, and yet we still have not let the science catch up and done random controlled trials that would validate it and make it official and clinically proven. So I wonder why that is. I wonder if it's the fact that a plant is free and you can't patent it, that keeps the science at bay that would prove the benefits of microdosing. So I went on my own human experiment and decided to prove or disprove the benefits of microdosing for myself. Spoiler alert, there were benefits. I had no drawbacks whatsoever. But let me just talk a little bit about some of what I've read online and some of what the science and the trends seem to be suggesting. So first of all, on the legal side, in May of 2019, Denver, Colorado became the first city in the United States to decriminalize psilocybin mushrooms, which was removing criminal punishments for users older than 21. So they made it akin to alcohol in that way. And there have been no major issues reported since then. This move was the first of many in policy that has now taken root in Oakland, Santa Cruz, Detroit, Ann Arbor, DC, and the entirety of Oregon. Rhode Island, Oklahoma, Hawaii, Michigan, and Missouri are among other states that have recently introduced legislation or task forces aimed at researching psilocybin. There's new research on the therapeutic effects of psychedelics, and it has culminated in an effort to decriminalize nature. We're 50 years now into Nixon's Controlled Substances Act, and that act single-handedly stopped studies on psilocybin mushrooms. Like there were random controlled trials. There were studies coming out of Harvard at the time, back in the 60s and early 70s. And Nixon put all of these things on Schedule 1 and made them a controlled substance and made it illegal to use them, to possess them, to test them, to research them. And since then, scientific inquiry has sort of died off. Modern interest has sparked from the remnants of this earlier era of American counterculture. And now mushroom enthusiasts and bipartisan policy leaders are looking to the promise of emerging markets for psychedelics to promote their potential psychological benefits in treatments like major depressive disorder, anxiety, OCD, and even addictions. This is pretty staggering stuff. I mean, we have pharmaceuticals controlling the marketplace on health and mental health, and they are known to have piles of side effects. I mean, it's something like 30,000 people a year die from Tylenol. Like Tylenol, you know what I mean? And I'm not saying stop using Tylenol if you need to, or stop using ibuprofen, but I am saying there's positive proof out there that it damages your liver and can kill you. There isn't proof like that about things like marijuana or psilocybin. In fact, to my understanding, nobody in recorded history from the beginning of time to now has ever died from cannabis, ever. So these plant medicine roots that we could take could prove to be much safer and side effect free. And yet the science is still unclear. Some of the science says there's benefits. Some of the science says there's drawbacks. The problem is the trials are not randomly controlled, and they lack control groups, and they're based on anecdotal evidence specifically for the most part now, because it has to be qualitative and based on user reports, because people, doctors, scientists, researchers, the curious among us are not allowed legally to research this without very specific exceptions and grants, or unless we go to other countries. But this anecdotal evidence comes from hundreds of thousands of people, and it's backed by age-old traditions of using plant medicine for healing for millennia. It just makes me wonder who has a vested interest in keeping the research into this phenomenon from reaching the scientific gold standard of random controlled trials. I think it's Big Pharma, because you can't patent a plant and it cuts directly into their profit margin if we can heal ourselves without their psychotropic synthetic chemicals. So that's a little bit of my bias creeping in, but that was even more motivation for me to do my own experiment. And it's been a couple years now since my experiment. I did it for 1 year, all of 2020. And I want to share the benefits, because most of the benefits have lasted since then, have been a permanent transformation in my life and in my psyche. And that's no small thing. There's new science on psilocybin as an antidepressant, and it's very optimistic. Some trials show that psilocybin may be just as effective as traditional SSRIs, or selective serotonin uptake inhibitor medications, at fighting depression. Studies show that brain function might be altered for up to a month after taking a single high dose of psilocybin. So single high dose, like a regular 3-gram dose, is sometimes now being recommended for depression and for anxiety, and you take it once a month, and for that whole month you're not dealing with your depression and anxiety. Microdosing is something different. It has the same indications for anxiety and depression, but you take a very, very tiny dose every couple of days, and you don't feel it at all. So you don't trip once a month. You just don't trip, but you have the small doses of the plant entering your body and your bloodstream and your brain. This finding suggests that the drug may aid in emotional resilience and flexibility in the brain. We have current knowledge of the science behind shrooms, but it's incomplete. But most of the information explains that mushrooms help the brain create new connections and increase neuroplasticity. One survey indicates that after microdosing psilocybin consistently, almost half of the users who took SSRIs reduced the dosage of their psychiatric medicine or stopped it completely, to no adverse effect and no side effects. That's pretty incredible. I mean, not only do the SSRIs have piles of side effects on their own, but they're expensive, they're costly, you can't get them without health insurance. Psilocybin, on the other hand, you can grow it in your backyard. So it's a leveling of the playing field. Quote in 2019, this was like a really comprehensive review. One of the quotes was from some scientists named Nutt and Cupers, and they wrote, "The problem with all psychedelic microdosing studies is how to do it legally and ethically. And this is the big question that needs answered. I agree more. They want to say, the regulations to explicit controlled drugs can be sought. After all, when used singly, they below the threshold for subjective effects and so are not psychoactive," which is a great point. They're not. You might the results of our efforts and those of the reviewers, talking about the reviewers of the phenomenon whose value is uncertain by rigorous scientific standards, but certain to hundreds of thousands of people who make the benefits every day. So I just want to be clear about that. Much research properly psychological and health claims, which is true. The question is, why is the research being done? Lastly, they say, we hope that this set of papers will research and help set a solid framework. Yeah, here's hoping that that's what happens, because right now people have to, look, duck and cover and look the other way and, find a mushroom dealer and in order to address their own mental health concerns, when it could be something that could be being freely recommended by your doctor or mental health professional if we would just do the science required to back this up. Another quote from that same meta-analysis from Stephen Ross. He works at NYU in the Addictive Disorders and Experimental Therapeutics Research Lab, and he said this: "One area not covered by the review article is speculation on the potential therapeutic utility of microdosing within psychiatry. If some of the claimed psychological or cognitive benefits, i.e. improved mood and attention, decreased substance craving, and pain perception of microdosing are real, meaning not simply due to placebo or expectancy effects, the next logical step would be to test the potential efficacy of microdosing in various clinical populations, i.e. those with major depression, bipolar, depressive disorder, ADHD, addictive disorders, and pain disorders, through random controlled trials and beyond, through the drug development process. Funding sources would have to be considered, whether that would come through private philanthropy, pharma, or government funding agencies." And that's right there, that I'm going to stop the quote for a second. That's a rub, because there's no motivation in this for government or big pharma. So, I mean, we're going to have to find funding or move the needle in the zeitgeist, which is where the transformation of human consciousness comes in. So the more of us that wake up to this, the more of us that express our interest in healing modalities that don't break the bank, the more likely it is to change the tide. I believe once we reach a critical mass in any sort of movement, things shift for the better in that movement. He goes on to say, finally, if microdosing proves to be effective for the many claimed effects reported in the lay public, i.e. enhanced creativity, work productivity, learning, memory, empathy, connection to others, spirituality, it could potentially be used to improve function in, quote, normals, without specific disease states, although it is unclear how drug development would proceed for non-clinical entities by using mostly illegal substances. Yeah, exactly. Like, these substances are illegal, and they're illegal for no good reason. These substances were around for thousands of years, and humans were using them safely for thousands of years before Nixon stuck his foot into the mix and said, well, we've got to legislate plants. Obviously, I'm a little bit biased here, and I keep bringing this up, but I think plant medicine it's a future cause. It's a wave of the future. It's one of the things that can really help change the trajectory of human flourishing. And I hope that as you listen to this podcast, it makes you a little bit more curious. curious as to why the funding isn't there, as to why the research isn't being done, and as to how potentially psychedelic microdosing could help you in your own life. Here's a promising piece of science. There was a review published just this past year in May of 2022, and it reviewed over 65 years of research into low-dose psychedelic use, including laboratory and placebo-controlled trials when they were available. The bottom line conclusion that those researchers came to was they argue that the claims that microdosing effects are largely due to expectancy are premature and possibly wrong. And I love that, because what is the vested interest to say that it's a placebo effect or an expectancy effect, except that the pharmaceutical industry would much rather us write it off as a placebo than say these effects could be real, because if these effects are real, we don't need the pharmaceutical companies to make them happen in our lives. We can grow them. We can do it ourselves. And there's nothing more threatening to a control system than a do-it-yourself populace who takes matters into their own hands. Finally, a study done in June by Sands and Company, that's the researcher's name, suggested that one issue that microdosing studies use measures better suited for much higher doses. And so that's an issue with why there might be some conflict in the data. Subtle changes might not be picked up by a lot of these measurements, which is what they found in their study. This was a small study which had only 34 individuals in it, but it was well controlled, and it was using a placebo control group to measure natural speech. So this was like, cerebral palsy and that kind of thing. They concluded that there were real changes in speech and that this was not a placebo at all. So the science seems to suggest there are very real benefits, but for some unknown reason, air quote, unknown reason, it has not reached the level of robust scientific inquiry necessary to make this pathway to healing officially clinically recommended. That's where personal stories come in. And so here's mine. I started microdosing on Christmas Eve of 2019, and I did so for an entire year. So my process was that I got a pile of mushrooms. I forget what the exact math is now. It might have been an ounce, might have been less. And I ground it all up into a powder, and then I used a capsule machine, and I made it into capsules. And I had weighed it. And so whatever the weight was, I divided it by the amount of capsules I had, and I decided, okay, that's my microdose. And so the microdose was somewhere between 0.3 and 0.6 grams. And, this is a DIY project, so like not every capsule is going to be exactly the same. I was doing them in a self-made capsule machine, but a microdose is like 1/10 of a regular dose. So like anything 0.5 grams and less, which is what I think most of my capsules were, is going to be considered a microdose. So for the first 2 weeks of microdosing, and I ended up having like 84 capsules, which is plenty for the whole year because you take it every third day. So you take it Monday, then Thursday, then Sunday, then Wednesday, then Saturday, then Tuesday, then Friday, like that, and so on in a cycling pattern. So you're taking it 2 or 3 times a week, depending on the week. For the first 2 weeks, I felt something. So it wasn't entirely sub-perceptual at first. There was just like a little tiny wave of nausea for about an hour or so after I took the pill. And I just sort of also felt like a lightening in my mood. Like, oh, even though I feel nauseous, everything else is fine. It just sort of felt like that. After the first 2 weeks, those perceptions actually went away completely. And every dose after that was completely sub-perceptual. And I have a very delicate constitution, or I'm very highly sensitive to substances like this. So it might be completely sub-perceptual for some of you right from the start. But for me, it took my body 2 weeks to get used to the dose and to sort of get the dosage right. But I was estimating using crude math because it's a DIY project, because the stuff is illegal in most places. And you have to kind of take experimenting into your own hands if you're going to try things that culture says are taboo, but you think could help you thrive. And so I did this. And after 2 weeks, my journey became very spiritual and very deep and very powerful. And it actually took me a while to notice. Like after the 2 weeks of sort of side effects went away, I just took the pill every third day, my self-made capsule. And I just went about my life. I actually set a reminder in my calendar that said dose day. And so I knew in the morning, pop your dose and go about your day. And after the 2 weeks, I became confident that I wasn't going to feel it, or it wasn't going to affect anything. So I was fine to take it in the mornings. And that's what I did for the whole year. Then March, the pandemic, lockdowns, crazy falling apart of society hits us all. And I was unflustered by it. And there were some things that aggravated me, obviously, like I lost my ability to go to the swimming pool. That had a big effect on me, things like that. But when looking back on 2020, I realized I adjusted really well and really easily to the changes in our lifestyle in the pandemic. And I attribute that now largely to my microdosing, because there were some other benefits that I noticed as time went on. Like, I didn't realize this in January or February, but by March and April, I realized I had sort of Teflon skin. There was a new non-reactivity about me. And any of you that know me personally, you know that I can be a little type A and a little neurotic at times. And I want to get my way, and I want it to be my way or the highway. At least that's how it used to be. But microdosing changed that a lot for me. And I developed this sort of non-reactivity. It's like what the Buddha talks about or it's Viktor Frankl actually talks about, there's that space between stimulus and response. And in that space is our ability to respond the way we want to take our power of choice and power back. Well, what microdosing did for me was it made that little tiny space between stimulus and my reactions wider and wider and wider, until there was a total non-reactivity in me. And when I would just notice people's behavior and say, oh, that's toxic behavior, but it doesn't have anything to do with me, it's fine. Even if it was directed towards me, it was just different. Like things were no longer personal. I had this uncanny, inhuman ability to stop taking things personally. And most of that ability has remained with me to this day. I mean, I can still get upset about stuff. I'm not enlightened in that sense by any means, but the way people's opinions and reactions and gestures and glances would affect me back in 2019 is 180 degrees different than how it affects me now. And that is all due to the microdosing. I mean, I did some life coaching and there were other things happening on my journey, but in a way, I even think microdosing led me to that openness to try those things out. It made me more creative. I was painting again. I was journaling again. I opened my own business, the Narrative Crafting Company, where you can do coaching with me. And that all happened in the pandemic. I became more confident. I became more motivated. I became more zen. I became more peaceful. Everything was less serious, more doable. And I knew on some deep and transcendent and fundamental level that I was fine, that Earth was fine, and that stress, more than circumstance, is what is actually holding humanity back. It was so clear to me, and a lot of that clarity has remained to this day. Since stopping the protocol, I have felt many of those same benefits remain with me. My brother-in-law now calls me the most tranquil person he knows, although he doesn't see inside my head. So I know where there's the lack of tranquility at times, but I'll still take that feedback and attribute that even to the microdosing as well. So the protocol that I used ended up being about 0.3 grams to 0.5 grams of mushrooms every third day, like I was telling you. And I did that for the entire year, and it transformed my entire life. And then I ended that year in a culminating ceremony where I took like a 5 gram, what Terrence McKenna, who's like the father of psychedelic journeying and whatever, he calls it a heroic dose. It was a 5 gram heroic dose. And I did that at my friend's house so she could sort of chaperone me. So I was like, it was in a totally inward journey where I did this like as a way of saying goodbye to my microdosing journey, at least for that year. I will pick it up again at some point in the future. I know that. But to say goodbye to the microdosing, I did a 5 gram dose, and it was an inward journey where I laid down in a dark room with a mask, and my friend was out in the other room sort of chaperoning to make sure that I didn't have like a crazy trip and want to run around her yard naked or something. So she was just there for like peace of mind. But I was in the room. There was loud music on, and I felt this powerful, powerful presence. There were colors. There was all of that stuff that you would think with a heroic dose like that I used to end my microdosing journey. But the main thing was that I realized I was connected to everything. I was everything. At one point, it was like there was this jaguar looking at me and saying to me, "You are responsible." And it was at first this really scary feeling of like, I'm responsible for everything. And then it switched and became this empowering feeling like I can make everything. I can move everything. I am one with everything. And that experience also changed my life. And so on both levels, on the level of microdosing and on the level of heroic dosing, there is something to be said for allowing plant medicine to do its work in you and allowing it to help you see yourself better, to see the world differently, and to see that there is hope. There's more than hope. There's certainty, certitude that everything is fine and everything is going to be fine. So that's what I have for you today. I just wanted to share my journey with microdosing and plant medicine because it's an emerging modality. It's on the rise, and it's something that we're going to hear more about every day going forward into this new future in the transformation of human consciousness. And if you're at all curious about it or want to know more about it, you can find me at thebrianhogan.com, and you can hit me up and ask me questions there. We can book a session to talk more about it, or you can just find a way to experiment with it on your own. I would encourage you to follow your own curiosity where this is concerned. Don't jump into it without any preparation, but don't hold back from it because of culture's rule that it's somehow taboo. If it's calling to you, it's calling to you for a reason. Anyway, thank you so much for being here and for listening to me. I appreciate you all tuning in today, watching this, if you're watching from the future or listening on the podcast. And if you know of anyone who might benefit from what you heard here today or what you saw, then please share this video, tag them, tweet it, like it, make it a reel, do it, make a TikTok out of it, do whatever you do on social media. And if you want to learn more about me and what I do, you can find me at the website right there below, thebrianhogan.com, or apply for coaching. In the meantime, I will see you next week for episode 2 on Thursday, January 12th at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time on your favorite social media networks. I stream live on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Thank you so much for being here. And until next week, see you soon. Bye.